你做嘅。
The events of the story begin with an infant thrown in front of the house of one of the poor people in the village in the cold. And while this person and his wife were leaving the door of their house, they were clearly astonished and did not hesitate for a moment to take this child and adopt him as if he were their own son. And the days and years passed, and this child grew up, and we know that his name is Xiao. And he was a very obedient boy and helped his poor father to bear the hardships of life until they were moving away step by step from the bankruptcy and poverty that they were in. And after years, Xiao grew up and his personality changed after he learned martial arts. And he was affected by the environment of independent conflicts in which he grew up, and it showed him an unnatural strength and supernatural abilities in martial arts. And he became one of the most important members of the village gangs, whose name was the Beggars Gang. Despite all this, Xiao did not assault or insult anyone and committed to the teachings of his father and mother, and he thought that they were his real father and mother. And years passed again for Xiao, and he became the leader of the Beggars Gang. And one day, and everything changed after that day, a neighbor tribe leader entered upon him. While sitting in a restaurant, his name was Song, and there were guards around him, and they were having a person imprisoned inside a cage, moving him on a cart. But unfortunately for Song, he had heard about Xiao, but he did not know him by sight. And Xiao noticed that there was a person imprisoned in the cage, and on this cage there was a claw. So he was very annoyed, and with all skill and sleight of hand, he threw a needle and removed the cover. And how upset he was from the insult and humiliation of the imprisoned person, as if he were an animal. And immediately the imprisoned person began to speak, whose name was Dao. And we know that Song imprisoned him because he intended to present him as a sacrifice and tear him apart in front of some grave. Song also started throwing needles to prevent Dao from speaking. The Xiao flew off his table and sat on Song's table boldly. He asked him to release Dao immediately from inside the cage, and here Song started to procrastinate. In the end, he completely refused to release him. Suddenly, Song's men started attacking Xiao violently, but Xiao was able to confront them easily. He started throwing them one after the other in every direction. At that moment, Song decided to attack Xiao himself. It was clear that their levels were similar, and the similarity of the martial arts schools they studied in the two of them. And the restaurant began to be destroyed completely as a result of the repeated attacks from Song and Xiao. And we began to see from Song an internal force in the form of fire inside his fist. But at that moment, Xiao confronted him with the force of the wind that came out of his fist as well. That force threw Song away, and he became injured and unable to move. At that moment, members of Zhao's gang of beggars entered, and here Song knew that he was facing one of the strongest fighters in the world at the time. And hours later, Xiao returned to the village with his gang, and they were at the peak of boasting and happiness with their strong leader. But on the borders of the village, there was a sudden gathering of the people of the village, and we hear from one of them that there is a foreigner and a traitor inside the gang. And then we see the leader of one of the families whose name is Morning, and he is standing on the mountain surveying the site from afar. And it is clear that he was the reason for the strife that happened to Xiao. And we learn that the deputy mayor of the village died, and the accused was Xiao, despite the lack of enmity between them previously. And here the wife of the deputy mayor appeared, who was crying and holding a message in her hands in which she claims that her husband left her before dies. And in the message, the truth about Xiao, who no one knew except the deputy. The letter was read in front of everyone. It began with shocking facts. It was that Zhao's real family was from one of the tribes hostile to the village, in which there was the gang of beggars. And there was a prophecy that said that the end of the gang one day would be at the hands of Xiao. After that, one of the elders of the old tribe entered and confirmed the words that were in the letter. And Xiao tried to prove that it is possible that the letter is fake, regardless of the story of his lineage, which he is not guilty of. But voices and opinions rose to remove him from the position of the gang leader. And indeed, the gang members began to move away from him and took the direction of the villagers' gathering. And the village law enforcement officer decided to discipline and subject Xiao to the sword. But suddenly, Xiao pulled out his weapon and stabbed himself several times with great violence in a terrifying scene, and announced that he had completely resigned from the leadership of the gang, and that he would search for the truth and would know it as soon as possible. And then we return to Morning, who was watching the situation in the mountain. It is clear that the sedition he plotted succeeded, and he ordered one of the guards around him, whose name was Lang, to go to a temple temple called Shaolin. And after that, very difficult days passed for Xiao, and he was very confused, and he felt that he had no identity, and his memories and his whole life were nothing, and it turned out to be a lie. And after that, he decided to go directly to his father and mother, who adopted him, to know the truth from them. But unfortunately, the attack took place on them. He found them lying on the ground in a very painful scene. Unfortunately, two people who were there by chance saw him. They accused him of killing his father and mother who adopted him. They continued to insult him and described him with the worst descriptions. And Xiao was surprised by all the hostility. He threw a stone at the ceiling above those two people. It collapsed on them completely, and they died instantly. After that, Xiao decided to bury his father and mother and bow to them with all respect in memory of them. And Xiao went to the Shaolin temple, and he confesses his mistakes to the temple's monk and complains about his sadness. And when Xiao approached the monk, he is shocked that he died minutes ago, and his body falls in his hands. And at that same moment also, Temple Keeper saw the monk dead in Zhao's hands, and he kept screaming that Xiao killed the monk. And moments later, the temple guards arrived at the scene of the accident, but Xiao had completely disappeared from there. And we go to one of the temple halls to find that the Temple Keeper was hiding. But Xiao was able to catch him, and we hear voices coming from afar that the temple amulet was stolen. And indeed, the amulet falls from the Temple Keeper while he was in Zhao's hand. And minutes later, the temple guards enter, and they point their weapons directly at Xiao. And Xiao was accused of killing his parents and the monk, and that he also stole the temple amulet. And suddenly, one of the monks attacked him with a strong spiritual power, but Xiao was able to confront it. But the Temple Keeper who was in his hand was severely hurt by this power, and Lang appeared while she was disguised in the form of the Temple Keeper who stole the amulet. After mourning, ordered her to go to the Shaolin temple, and then Xiao decided to take her and run away immediately because he was carrying her in his hand, and he fights the temple guards alone. And when Xiao reached safety with her, he decided to treat Lang and save her life with his energy after being very affected by the monk's blow. And Xiao began to ask Lang about her identity and about the reason for stealing the temple amulet, but she justified stealing it and said that she was going to read it and return it again. After that, Xiao decided to help her and bring her food because she was very sick and he felt bad about her. But unfortunately, Lang remained sick as she was, but her condition got worse and worse. So Xiao took her in one of the carriages. She was bleeding and dying, and he took her to the gang's therapist, who was one of the most skilled doctors at the time. On their way, Xiao tried to wake her up by his energy, and then we hear Lang talking to him and telling him the truth about her when she stole the temple amulet. Her story was somewhat similar to Zhao's story, which is that she was a servant of the Morning Tribe, and he bargained with her to steal an amulet for him so that he could tell her her origins and who her father and mother were. At that time, Xiao promised her that he would help her because he felt what she was going through. But while they were talking, Lang fell and fainted, and Xiao tried to save her with his energy again. But this time he failed, so he went straight to the doctor. But while Xiao on his way to the doctor, we find that the entire village and the gang members are gathered and determined to get rid of Xiao. Finally, Xiao reached the village gate, and the council received news that he was at one of its gates. They were extremely angry. Xiao entered with all courage, holding Lang in his hand, and confronted the villagers who accepted him with blame and reproach. They thought that he had gotten rid of the monk and conspired to steal the temple amulet with Lang. Then the doctor that Xiao was looking for appeared, and we hear Xiao begging him to save Lang, who was aggravated because of him. Although Xiao saved Dr. Lam's life several times, he was ungrateful and refused to help anyone related to Xiao. Then the widow of the village vice president appeared and accused Xiao of getting rid of her husband. She offered him that they could help Lang in exchange for his life. Unfortunately, Xiao agreed to sacrifice his life and put it in exchange for the doctor's treatment for Lang. Then Xiao stood in front of the villagers and tried to make them sympathize with him and assure them that he was innocent. But everyone was determined that he was not innocent, despite mentioning Zhao's achievements that he had made while he was the head of the gang. Finally, Xiao fulfilled his promise to everyone that he would give them his life, but who would be able to confront him and finish him off. At that moment, a confrontation took place that was the most violent in Zhao's career. He was the only one facing more than 200 fighters who were the best of their time. With the increasing numbers to kill Xiao, he began to kill them with all ferocity and violence like a madman, especially when he found out that the widow of the vice president was going to kill Lang, who was sick. With Zhao's determination that he would save her, he was stabbed from behind by Dr. Lam. Finally, he was able to control Xiao, who decided to sacrifice his life in order to save the maid Lang, whose goal was just as noble as his goal, which was to know her origins and history. Although Xiao was completely injured and was trying not to let Lang's hand, but the attack continues despite his bleeding and injuries everywhere, and their determination is that they will finish him off. But at the last moment, completely masked person appeared appeared on the roof of the square and took Xiao while he was injured and completely unable to move. After that, the doctor decided to keep Lang alive and treat her in the hope that Xiao would return again and kill him. Finally, Xiao returns to life again, thanks to the person who saved him and thanks to the internal energy that was inside him. And at that moment, the masked person told him that Lang he saved was from a tribe that is the enemy of his real tribe and his real father. At that moment, Xiao was shocked and asked the masked person about his real father, and his response was very strange, which was that his mother is a tyrannical person without a heart and without mercy. Immediately after that, the masked person left, as if he appeared to save Xiao's life and deliver a message and leave. We return again to Lang, and we find her posing as Dr. Lam to escape, and she actually succeeds in escaping. But the disaster while she was going out, she met Dr. Lam, who she was originally disguised as, and she was actually able to stab Dr. Lam and burn him in his private medical center and his rare compound. Finally, Lang reached Xiao and she was crying, not believing that he was still alive and that they would meet again. There was a clear love story between them and insistence that their true origins, if there was enmity between them, this was a motive. They will remain one hand and continue their lives together. After months of searching, Xiao and Lang were able to reach a person in the middle of the river who was suspected of being Lang's father, and his name was Dawn. We see Dawn welcoming them in a good way and hosting them near his house. While Lang was near Dawn and his family, she hears continuous disputes between them and their family life is not at its best. Because of Dawn's multiple relationships, his wife abandoned one of his daughters as punishment for him. When Lang heard this, she was stunned and her suspicions were completely confirmed that Dawn is her father. But Lang kept this secret to herself and did not tell him. After that, Lang and Xiao met and agreed that they would continue to love each other and that circumstances and borders would not separate them in any way. Then came the shock when we learned that Dawn was the leader of the battalion that finished off the original Xiao's family, and so Xiao went to Dawn and told him the truth. The regret and remorse on Dawn's face was clear. However, Xiao could not forgive him and overcome the grudge he had against Dawn, and he threw him with all his strength into the middle of the river. However, we were surprised that Lang was disguised as Dawn, her father, in order to fix things between them. Unfortunately, he was the one who took the hit. Xiao quickly went down into the river and saved Lang. But while she was on his hand, she was breathing her last breaths, and he kept crying a lot over her. He was sad and felt that everything he loved was lost, and then Lang was handed over to her family, and Xiao confessed to them that she was their daughter. At that moment, Dawn confessed to Xiao that he was completely innocent of the blood of his father and mother, and that they indirectly wanted them to fall into each other and get rid of each other. Of course, this was the plan of the villagers and the gang of beggars who failed in every way to get rid of Xiao. Immediately, Xiao went to the one responsible for the sedition from his villagers from the beginning, whose name was Long. Of course, he had a relationship with the Mourning tribe and the widows of the vice president, who had a relationship with them from the beginning. Long tried to escape, but Mr. Mourning was waiting for him outside and was shot with more than 100 arrows in his body and died instantly. Moments later, Xiao came out and used a shield to protect him from the terrible amount of arrows. Mourning offered Xiao to be his assistant in the rule of China, but Xiao refused completely. After that, a very fierce battle took place between Mourning and his men and Xiao, and it was going to end with Mourning's victory. This was after Xiao became weak as a result of the successive conflicts, but Xiao thought that he would be completely finished if he was defeated, other than the loss and family turmoil he was in. After that, he got up immediately and regained his strength and finally defeated Mourning. The power of evil ended. After Xiao won, the gang of beggars appeared behind him again, asking him to return for leadership, but he refused and preferred to live in peace as a farmer in the mountains with Lang, who miraculously escaped death.